Hi, everyone. My name is Spencer Dutson. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, certified emotionally focused therapist and supervisor, and a certified EMDR therapist. Today, I'm excited to be talking with you about emotional intelligence and specifically how the movies Inside Out 1 and 2 relate to emotional intelligence. Before we get started, I just want to mention something that's important about our time here together. First and foremost, you have to understand that this is not therapy. It's a group of people who are coping with a variety of problems. And so information discussed and shared in this group is intended to support the therapeutic process and not replace or be the therapeutic process for change. If you're feeling suicidal or having life-threatening thoughts, this group is not the place for you to talk about those things. Please consider calling 988, getting in touch with your therapist as soon as possible, or reaching out to a loved one or emergency services for additional support. So, what is emotional intelligence? Well, like a good millennial, I went to Google, and what Google tells us about emotional intelligence is this. It defines it as the ability to understand and manage your own emotions as well as the emotions of others. So again, understand and manage. Those are the two key words that I'll point out. Understand and manage your own emotions as well as the emotions of others. So, in essence, if you have low emotional intelligence, you're going to struggle with that. If you have high emotional intelligence, you're going to excel at that. So, people who have good emotional intelligence can typically do some of the following things. They can identify and label their feelings and others' feelings. They can understand how their emotions impact their behaviors and how their emotions impact others. They typically use emotional information to guide their thinking and behavior versus like being controlled by their emotions. They can adjust their emotions to adapt to different environments, meaning they have emotional flexibility. They can communicate more effectively, typically, solve problems better, and show empathy. Now, with emotional intelligence, I think it's important to keep in mind that there's kind of two extremes, if you will, when it comes to not having good emotional intelligence. So if you have good emotional intelligence, you're not going to be in these kind of extremes, though you might notice yourself still fluctuating one side to the other, right? So one extreme is that if you have low emotional intelligence, your emotions might control you, meaning when you feel sad, angry, anxious, etc., that emotion completely controls you in the sense of like maybe not being able to do your day-to-day stuff, function how you should, that kind of deal. The other extreme is that maybe you control your emotions too much, meaning you shut your emotion off. Maybe you think emotion is pointless or not helpful or destructive, right? Well, that's also low emotional intelligence because you're essentially hanging up the phone to your emotions, and so you can't use them to help you. Now, as a therapist, I find that it's really helpful that people understand the purpose behind emotion. Okay. So I think therapy kind of gets this bad rap of like focusing on emotion in this like fluffy kind of way where it's like, oh, that sounds great or that sounds romantic, but like it's not helpful, right? Emotions make things harder. Well, here's the thing. Biologically, if you look at the process of emotions, you feel first, then you act or react to that feeling, and then you put a label to that feeling, aka a thought. Okay. So emotions are driving the bus, whether you care to acknowledge that or admit that or not. To think that you don't have emotions or that emotions don't drive your behavior is a sign of low emotional intelligence and can be quite problematic. Now, maybe that's necessary sometimes. Like, for example, if your job is an accountant, an engineer, a pilot, things like this, you can't let emotion come into that. You have to be very focused on logic and numbers and things that are very, very concrete, right? But if that's your always, that's going to become an issue because you're not going to be able to do some of those things that I mentioned earlier, like effective communication and showing empathy and using emotions to guide your behavior and know how to react to people and show up for people in ways that's actually helpful, right? So again, low emotional intelligence could look like emotions control you or you overly control those emotions. Neither outcome is super great, but that's what can happen when we have low emotional intelligence. So transitioning a little bit here to Inside Out 1 and Inside Out 2 and what they can teach us about emotional intelligence. First and foremost, if you have not seen these movies, as a therapist, I would strongly encourage you go see those movies. They're really well done. They're very entertaining, I think, for anyone of all ages. And again, they teach us a lot about emotion and I think what's healthy versus what's not healthy. Now, by no means are they the gold standard for what emotions, how we should view emotions, but I think if we take it with a grain of salt and look at it from the perspective of like what this message is trying to share with us, I think it can be very valuable. And I want to pull out some key elements to this. So if you're not familiar at all with Inside Out 1 or 2, the basic premise is you're following a girl and her life and some of the things that she's doing. And there's a lot of interaction in what's happening inside her head, which is funny because emotions are a bodily experience, right? They don't just happen here, but you get the point, right? The emotions kind of reside in her head. They have this control panel where they kind of like help this child interact with different things, right? Inside Out 1 is very focused on a move that happens for a young child. I get the impression she's kind of like a preteen, right? And then Inside Out 2 is all about that same girl. She becomes a teenager though, and now has to navigate, well, teenager things, right? Like puberty and new friends and everything like that, right? And the movie again is all about what's going on, what are these emotions doing, and how they interact, right? And Inside Out 2, you're introduced to new emotions, right? The first movie only talks about a few, like anger, joy, sadness, uh, fear, those kinds of things. And then in Inside Out 2, these new emotions are introduced with the main character being anxiety, which I think most of us can kind of get what that's like, right? But anxiety is that main emotion. And so that's just kind of like an overview, right? It's about the inner workings of the emotional world and how that then translates into how a person shows up, right? Kind of again illustrating that emotional intelligence that I highlighted earlier. And so here are some of the core messages from these movies that I think are really, really important. And again, please, if you haven't seen these movies already, go see them. This will make more sense. The first is that our emotions signal us to act or react in certain ways. Now, if you go to the Latin root for what the word emotion means, the word emotion means to move. In fact, take the E out of emotion, and what do you get? Motion, right? So our emotions are designed to move us, to encourage us to act or react. Now, sometimes that action or reaction is not great, but that's the purpose behind emotion, right? Part of emotional intelligence is learning how to recognize those signals and do something appropriately with them. For example, in Inside Out 1, when the girl gets overwhelmed by all this stuff, she decides, I'm just going to move. I'm just going to leave, right? I'm going to get out of here because this is not a fun place for me to be. Bad way to deal with the emotion, right? Not a great way. But what does the emotion signal to her? The thing it's signaling is I need connection. I need support. I need to be grounded. And then she finds that, right, in healthier ways. Okay. So again, our emotions signal us to act or react in certain ways. Next is our emotions are part of us. Our emotions are not us. For example, it's very common to say, I'm anxious. No, you are not anxious. You are feeling anxiety. Now, I know that's maybe syntax or sentence structure stuff. It's like, okay, well, whatever. But again, the messaging is really key here. In Inside Out 1 and 2, we see that these emotions are different parts of us, right? They interact, they both with themselves and then with the outside. And so we are not those emotions. It's just that those emotions are playing a part in us. And that's so key because whenever as a therapist I work with someone and they overly identify with this idea of like, I'm anxiety, I'm anxious. How do you change that, right? Like changing self, changing personality is extremely difficult. However, if you can look at it like, wait a minute, I am so much more than just my anxiety or my depression or my PTSD or my whatever, then you have a better sense of like maybe being able to do something about it that could create meaningful change, right? So again, staying stuck in those labels is not helpful, but seeing the label as an experience that then we can interact with, that's what I think can be the beginnings of change, right? And so the very way that Inside Out 1 and 2 show us of these emotions is that, right? These are parts of us that are interacting, right? These emotions have relationships. In Inside Out 1, we see the relationship between joy and sadness. And in Inside Out 2, we see the relationship between joy and anxiety and how they interact and how that then creates outward manifestations of behavior in the child that we're following in the movies. Next and last point for what the kind of core messages from these movies. Our emotions serve a purpose that is designed to help us. It's so important that we view our emotions as trying to help us and not trying to hurt us, right? Now, if you've had life experiences where emotions have been problematic, you probably will have a hard time believing me. You'll probably look at this and say, well, but that's not really true for me. Like my emotions kind of make my life worse, right? And that's probably true because what's happening is the emotion is overrunning your life. The emotion is controlling you, right? If we can learn to cope with and process our emotion, which is a key part of what therapy is all about, then we can actually listen to what the emotion is trying to do and the positive purpose that it serves instead of getting always caught in the negative action or reaction that comes from that emotion. So the example from the movies that I'll highlight is from Inside Out 2. Inside Out 2, again, is all about anxiety and how it interacts with the other parts of self or these other emotions. And it kind of culminates with, the child having a panic attack, which is a powerful scene, like really powerful, very intense, powerful. Um, and what we learned from that scene is that like the anxiety, it got to a level that led to this panic attack and it was bad. But we realize and see how powerfully this anxiety was just wanting this kiddo to fit in, wanting everything to turn out right. And so it tried to control everything, but in a way that made it worse, right? That purpose was to try to help this child have a positive social experience, to be aware of potential negative outcomes. It just drove the bus too much, right? So again, our emotions serve a purpose. Sometimes it can be hard to figure out what that purpose is or to have empathy or understanding for that. And therapy can be a huge resource to helping you towards that. But as a general rule of thumb, I always encourage people, get curious about your emotion. If this emotion could talk to you, what would it be saying? What is it trying to encourage you to do or not do? And then you can decide, is that actually something I want to do or not do? Or is this emotion just overriding me right now? So again, the key three messages from these movies are one, our emotions signal us to act or react in certain ways, right? They encourage us to move. Two, our emotions are part of us. They are not us. And three, our emotions serve a purpose that's designed to help us. So how these relate to emotional intelligence? Well, generally speaking, one of the biggest things is that if we can internalize these concepts, they can help us to decriminalize our emotions, which I know is a big word, decriminalize. What I mean by that is it can take away the negative connotation we put towards our emotions, that this emotion or that emotion is bad. No, emotion just is. Sure, some emotions feel negative or don't feel great, but they're not bad. They just are, right? It's their body trying to signal certain things, right? So that's the first thing. The next thing is that it helps us to hear and understand ours and others' emotions better. If we can take a step back from our previous understanding of what emotions were and kind of lean into these three concepts that I just shared, we can be more receptive to other people's and our own emotions because we're not going to jump to that reaction first, right? Because we're going to practice that curiosity. Curiosity is such a powerful tool to being able to work with or work through our emotions instead of having them control us, right? Especially when it comes to when other people are being emotional towards us, right? Like if someone's really sad or angry because of something we did, we can stop and be like, well, let me think about what's that about? Like, why would they be feeling that way? What could create that? To be more empathetic and understanding about that. And the final and maybe the most important aspect about this that I hope you take away from our time together is that this emotional intelligence stuff and these messages from Inside Out 1 and 2 will help us to act with greater intentionality. So again, emotions are going to happen whether you want them to or not, like I said earlier. If you choose to ignore them, they're going to influence you without you doing anything about it. However, if you're aware about them, you can start to act intentionally, meaning that when you feel an emotion, again, you can decide, how do I want to act in this moment? Does it fit for me to act this way or this other way? If the answer is yes, great, go for it. If the answer is no, then change in a way that's productive for you. Because it doesn't do you or other people any good to act or react from an emotional place that's not intentional, right? Now, huge disclaimer here, and I try to mention this often. Maybe some of these concepts that I'm talking about resonate with you and they make sense to you. And you might be like, yeah, I'm going to do this. I just want you to know that this stuff is not easy to do. The last thing I want is for you to end this video and leave and be like, so excited to do it. And then you have the first emotion that hits you and it completely blindsides you or completely knocks you off your feet. It's going to happen. You're human, right? But with practice, with intentionality of slowing yourself down, getting curious about your feelings and lean into that, you'll be able to discover the things that I'm talking about here in a way that's personal to you, right? Not just some blanket statement that I throw out at everyone, but rather something that's personalized to you and will help you in your mental health journey. But again, because this stuff is not easy, I would strongly encourage you, if you're listening to this now and you're not already in therapy, please reach out to us. Our therapists are especially trained to be able to help people manage their emotions in a way that's specific and helpful to them. We're all trained in a modality called emotionally focused therapy because we understand how important emotions are to our overall mental health and how they are the start, like I said earlier, of problematic patterns and not the beginning or the end, right? Or the middle or the end. They are the beginning. So we need to address things from their core to be able to find that lasting healing. But again, please seek help if you need it. You don't have to be alone in this. We can support one another. Again, thank you everyone for listening to me and joining with me today. If you have any other questions, please reach out to our offices. And please take care of yourselves out there. I'll chat with you later.